So, of course, there could be war between Turkish-backed forces and the United States. There could be easily war between Turkish-backed forces and Israel. That would bring a wider war. There could be a new war with Iran. We don't have clarity on this. The Israel lobby in the United States has been so dominant and so reckless, and Netanyahu is absolutely so profoundly irresponsible, and his government is perhaps even worse than Netanyahu, though that's a little hard to say. But this is a completely extremist government that is absolutely aiming for a wider war. Everything is possible right now in the Middle East. Israel wants wider war. It wants to pull Trump into a wider war. There will be people in his government that want a wider war. There will be people that oppose it. And Netanyahu definitely is angling for a wider war. So, unfortunately, in our world, the decisions of a few people shape the fates of tens or hundreds of millions of people, or even billions of people. And that's the situation that we're in right now. Nobody gets to vote on this. This is a decision of a few people, and they do not behave well very often. Obvious. We are one vote away from a solution that would bring peace to the Middle East. And that one vote is the veto that the United States imposed on having a state of Palestine as a sovereign state alongside Israel on the borders of the 4th of June, 1967, according to international law. The United States has vetoed this on behalf of Israel. This, to my mind, is the root of the conflicts throughout the region. The Netanyahu doctrine is there will never be a Palestinian state. And because of that, there will be resistance to Israel. And because of that, Israel must be at war with every government in the region that supports the Palestinian cause. And this goes back 30 years. And Israel has provoked wars all over the region to try to replace regimes that are behind Palestine and behind Hamas and Hezbollah, who fight for Palestine. And so rather than having peace, we have war. And the United States has gone to war on Israel's behalf repeatedly, to the great detriment of the world, to the great detriment of the United States, and to the great detriment, in my view, of Israel's long-term security as well. This is the basic choice. Do we have peace or do we have expanding war? And the hold of the Israel lobby on American politics has been so strong that the choice has been expanding war in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Sudan, in Somalia, in Libya, and if Netanyahu gets his way, in Iran. And the things that we've been talking about before are the things that destroy nations and destroy economies. Western hegemony is, let's just say, delusional, and it was always cruel, but it is a dramatic anachronism in our time. The idea, the presumption that the United States in any way should lead the world, this place of 4.1% of the world population, 4.1%, should deem itself as the world's leader is of course an absurd delusion at this stage of world history. And yet there are people in Washington who believe in it. And as long as they believe in it, and as long as the U.S. is investing more than $1 trillion a year in its war machine, these risks remain absolutely dramatic. I'm a very big fan of the Belt and Road Initiative because it is an initiative of connective infrastructure, roads, fast rail, power, 5G, digital. These are the things that make an economy function properly. They are peaceful, they are cooperative, they bring nations together. I think the BRICS is aiming for a peaceful, multipolar world. Of course, the United States says the opposite, that the BRICS are aiming to bring down the so-called rules-based order. The rules-based order, I think everybody should understand at this stage, means U.S. hegemony. Yes, the BRICS are aiming to end the hegemony of the United States or any other country for that matter. They're aiming for a multipolar world. These are countries that are especially interested in economic development. They are developing countries. They want higher living standards. They want peace. They do not want continued wars. And that project of Belt and Road or these corridors, these are economic projects. They aren't NATO expansion. They aren't military bases. They aren't annexation. They aren't Greater Israel. These are economic projects. They make a lot of sense. But what you're saying is not good speculation about the future. It is the historical record. What has happened to every intervention? There is ongoing, nonstop war and division. This is true, of course, in Iraq. It's true, obviously, in Lebanon. It is true, obviously, in Syria, where this country has been completely dismantled, broken in every way. It was a functioning middle-income country with normal development prospects before 2011, before the deliberate attempt to destroy it. What has happened in Libya since Gaddafi was brought down? Did that bring peace and democracy, as these fools in my government pretend it will? No, of course not. It has brought nonstop civil war. Somalia, it doesn't exist as a functioning country to this day. Sudan, absolutely astounding. There are millions of people on the brink of starvation. There is a war inside Sudan, a civil war, and there's a civil war in South Sudan. In other words, what has happened from this 7 wars in 5 years strategy of Netanyahu and the Israel lobby? Yes, they've remade the Middle East into a catastrophe, into an ongoing, fulminant war zone. And Netanyahu's most fervent hope till this day is war with Iran. And of course, the other, it's not an irony, it's the tragedy of all of this. Iran has been indicating, I can't wait to see it go, for 2 years, peace offerings, saying we want to negotiate, we want to find a diplomatic resolution. I spoke with another intermediary yesterday who asked not to be identified, who was involved in high-level discussions where Iran was trying to reach out to find a diplomatic approach. We have a remarkable statement by General Wesley Clark that is very well known, that after the 9/11 attack, Wesley Clark visited the Pentagon and he was shown a piece of paper that said 7 countries would be overthrown in 5 years. And the list was Iraq, Syria, Iran, Lebanon, Somalia, Sudan, and Libya. And Clark expressed befuddlement and bewilderment. What does this have to do with 9/11? And the answer was, we're making the Middle East over again. This was the clean break strategy from 1996, now to be implemented. And in September 2001, though Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. The decision was made immediately that to implement this remake of the Middle East, the first invasion would be of Iraq. This by itself is interesting, just as a footnote. The reason that they chose Iraq first was not because of Saddam or weapons of mass destruction, which they knew did not exist, but rather there was a legal fiction that they could use, a 1998 Iraq Liberation Act, which had been passed by Congress and signed by President Clinton, that made it the law of the land that Saddam Hussein should be removed from power. Now, let me state at the outset, I think Netanyahu is a madman. I think what Israel has done is destructive beyond belief. But the point is that there has been a plan. The plan has been to remake the Middle East in Israel's image, if you will. And already back in 1996, in a neocon paper written for the new Israeli prime minister at the time, Benjamin Netanyahu, called Clean Break, this was described. The clean break was a clean break of the Middle East, that Israel, of course, meaning the United States, military backing Israel, would take out Israel's enemies. And this has been an operational plan, strangely enough, at least since 9/11. I think the interesting starting point is a statement by Netanyahu a couple of days ago. He gave a press conference. He said that this is a completion of a step-by-step process that Israel has been pursuing. And I think that that is not bragging, if I could put it in that odd way. I think that that is an accurate statement of what has happened. But it's not only an Israeli effort of the last few months with its war on Hamas and Hezbollah, which dramatically weakened the military base of the Assad government, which depended on Hezbollah for its military backing. But this is a campaign of Israel, as Netanyahu himself said, that is to remake the Middle East, that goes back 30 years, actually. I think that there are strong reasons that go beyond Syria for the rapprochement of Iran and Saudi Arabia, not the least of which is that each of these two countries actually wants normalcy and economic development. They actually do not want ongoing war. I think Israel and the United States are the main provocateurs in the region. And I think the failure of the diplomacy to establish peace through a state of Palestine alongside the state of Israel is strangely enough, even though that's just one corner of the Middle East, it's the remaining dominant factor for the continued war. And the reason is that Israel remains on a rampage throughout the region, in Lebanon, in Syria, in wanting war with Iran. The immediate determination, it seems, to annex the West Bank. In all of this, Israel is a great destabilizer. And as long as the United States steadfastly backs that destabilization, there cannot be peace in the region. But there is a common interest of Iran and Saudi Arabia in not having this spill into a generalized regional war. And this is the direction it will head if there is a breakdown in that new rapprochement, or if the United States continues to back Israel in its, I think, utterly reckless and destructive vision of the greater Israel, so-called. Netanyahu has been the most destructive U.S. president we ever had, because he's told every president what to do. Every president has completely supported Netanyahu's vision of remaking the Middle East until today. And by the way, with Israel's illegal grab and effective invasion of territory, I mean, not effective, invasion of Syria in the last few days, the U.S. statesman said, well, yes, so we regard this as an understandable provisional action of the United States, I mean, of Israel, and the United States supports this. Of course, the United States supports this. The United States supports whatever Israel does, however much chaos is created out of all of this. And I just say this because, of course, no one mentions what this has to do with the people of Syria at all, except that we see for one day the happy talk of those flags waving in Damascus, like we saw the flags waving in Baghdad, like we saw the flags waving in Mogadishu, like we saw the flags waving in Khartoum, blah, 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 blah. We know that this is the prelude to yet more bloodshed. Nobody in the United States government, certainly not in the Israeli government, certainly not in the British government. I regard those as the three worst, by the way, but there are others that might challenge them, but I regard those as the three worst. Nobody would even deign to mention the people involved in this. Let's say that no country has more messed up the world, and certainly the Middle East, than Britain. Britain already made the problems that we're facing in 1915. Basically, in 3 years, 1915 to 1917, Britain promised 3 times over all of this land. First to the French, second to the Arabs, third to the Jews. This is in the Balfour Declaration. So this is this is British imperial manipulations that now have a shadow and a legacy of more than 100 years of chaos. The French, without a principle, okay? The French are always a little bit second fiddle to the British, but they wanted their little imperial peace as well, and they got it in Lebanon. They have it in Syria. And what good has come out of any of this? Not at all. Britain will never get this right. The nostalgia for empire, the bravado, the arrogance, it's, by the way, remarkably undiminished. 80 years after the end of the empire, Keith Starmer, they all do. Boris Johnson, they all think they're Lord Palmerston. They're all going off to battle. So Britain, I give no hope for at all in this, because nostalgia seems to have the longest lifespan of all, imperial nostalgia. I have not understood for years continental Europe's European Union approach to any of this. Of course, there are glimmers where there's some insight. The Spanish government has been very good on Palestine. The Irish, absolutely wonderful. They have their own colonial experience. In the interpretation of the people running Israel and the United States, if the other side says negotiate, that means they are weak, and you should start by assassinating literally the negotiators, because it's very important to kill people who would negotiate in the Netanyahu neocon vision, and then you go to war against them. They're weak. This is the madness that we're in right now. What will come out of this? Nothing good. Absolutely nothing good. If you look at the killing fields and the chaos that Israel and the United States have sown throughout the Middle East basically since the Iraq War, it's stunning that there has not been one moment of political solution, not one moment of peace, not one resolution of one crisis. So to my mind, this whole approach is madness. And if you were to have read Netanyahu or known Netanyahu back 30 years, it was madness then, and it's madness today. The idea that the jihadist groups that the United States has backed, and of course everybody does understand, I'm sure listening in, that Al-Qaeda is a U.S. creation, was and always has been and continues to be. So all these, quote, terrorist groups, yes, they're on CIA backing from the start. It's not even, of course, not even a secret. It's thoroughly documented in shelffuls of books. You don't get peace out of this. You don't get a safe border because we've brought down the evil Assad regime. You get ongoing war and chaos, and that's already, but that's not going to sit well. That's not a stable environment. Netanyahu already said, this is ours. We're going to claim this. We're never giving this up. This is Israel's whole approach. Whatever we take is ours. And it's up to us to decide what we take more. This is the greater Israel approach. It's completely destabilizing. It's madness. What we're seeing in the last days is part of a plan that goes back more than 20 years. It sounds zany, but this is craziness that we're dealing with. This is a plan for taking out 7 regimes. So they thought legally, literally, I mean, you do something completely lawless, initiating war, but you look for a legal fig leaf. And that was why Iraq first. But the idea was that Syria would be overthrown immediately afterwards. And then immediately after that would be the rest of the list. And what has been explained to me by military individuals that were in the midst of this is that the U.S. military got tied down in Iraq in an unexpected way with the insurgency. So they didn't move straight to take out Assad, which was supposed to happen in 2003. So this is quite interesting. But why do this? And Netanyahu spelled this out in his book in 1996, Fighting Terrorism, and then in a rather remarkable speech that he gave in the United States on September 20th, 2001, just after 9/11. He said, you don't fight terrorists by fighting the terrorists. You fight terrorists by fighting the states that support them. And Netanyahu's idea, backed by the crazy, violent, repulsive neocons, I hope I'm being clear, in the U.S. government, said, yes, we will remake the Middle East by war, one after another. So Hamas and Hezbollah are backed by Saddam Hussein. They're backed by Assad. They're backed by Iran. In fact, it wasn't just the Iranian axis of resistance back then. It was all of these states around Israel that were supporting the Palestinian cause. And if you think about it, of course, Iraq was 2003. The war on Assad started in 2011. Not everyone is aware of Operation Timber Sycamore, but this is the CIA operation to overthrow Assad under Obama. And everyone should understand, doesn't matter, Democrats, Republicans, nice people, not nice people. America has one foreign policy of continuity, and it has nothing to do with Democrats and Republicans. So Assad was 2011, the war started, but they didn't succeed in overthrowing Assad because he had backing from Russia, which started especially in 2015. Hezbollah was the backstop of the Syrian regime. And the idea was, of course, by attacking Hezbollah in Lebanon and drawing Hezbollah forces into Lebanon and blocking the resupply of Hezbollah through the active bombing of Syria in recent weeks and through this military action, this was the way to bring down the regime. It happened, I'm sure, much faster than anybody anticipated. Now Israel is invading Syria from the southwest into the northeast. Where it stops, who knows? There are crazy people in Israel who say go on to Damascus. Then if you go down the rest of the list, Somalia, well, that was attacked by U.S. proxy by Ethiopia in 2006. Sudan, the United States broke Sudan into pieces, it literally dividing it into Sudan and South Sudan, with the clever ploy of the United States to put all the oil reserves in South Sudan, not in North Sudan, which is now bankrupt and in starvation and in civil war. Libya in 2011. Lebanon, of course, invaded repeatedly by Israel, including just recently. So actually, this vision has been carried out. And this is what Netanyahu was crowing about a couple of days. We have remade the Middle East. We've done it step by step. So we should have no doubt that this is part of a long-term strategy. Of course, there are cameo appearances by Erdogan. He wants Turkish influence in Syria. This definitely plays a role. I don't mean to minimize that. But this is part of a long-standing plan. And the immediate collapse, which none of us saw coming, I don't know anyone that saw this except, I suppose, inside the Israeli intelligence community and no doubt CIA and a few others. I think that there are strong reasons that go beyond Syria for the rapprochement of Iran and Saudi Arabia, not the least of which is that each of these two countries actually wants normalcy and economic development. They actually do not want ongoing war. I think Israel and the United States are the main provocateurs in the region. And I think the failure of the diplomacy to establish peace through a state of Palestine alongside the state of Israel is strangely enough, even though that's just one corner of the Middle East, it's the remaining dominant factor for the continued war. And the reason is that Israel remains on a rampage throughout the region, in Lebanon, in Syria, in wanting war with Iran. The immediate determination, it seems, to annex the West Bank. In all of this, Israel is a great destabilizer. And as long as the United States steadfastly backs that destabilization, there cannot be peace in the region. But there is a common interest of Iran and Saudi Arabia in not having this spill into a generalized regional war. And this is the direction it will head if there is a breakdown in that new rapprochement, or if the United States continues to back Israel in its, I think, utterly reckless and destructive vision of the greater Israel, so-called.